For a lot of people, their first love is what they'll always remember. For me, it's always been the first hate. There are an awful lot of bubble reputations floating around that, you know, one wouldn't be doing one's job if one didn't itch to prick. Anyone who, like me, when they think about the Clintons, thinks about the zombies, thinks about the undead, stakes through the heart, silver bullets. And Reagan, he was a regular habitual liar, and as for the economy, we're still living with his deficit.
The man was lucky to be governor of Texas. Unusually incurious, abnormally unintelligent, amazingly inarticulate, fantastically uncultured, and apparently quite proud of all these things.
Tertullian, one of the church fathers, said that one of the great things about being in heaven was you'd be able to watch the writhings and the tortures of those who've been sent to hell.
Jerry Falwell made a career out of sponsoring dislike.
Come back.
If you gave
Apollo
Falwell
gets
an
too
animal,
close
he
to
could be buried in a
dancing
matchbox.
performance.
I think his death is a deliverance.
Janet Reno is particularly annoying me at the moment, I think. And I'm completely furious with her for burying the Iraq-Gate scandal. The temperature in Iraq at midday around that time goes well above 100, and you have to be coated in sunscreen. That's fine until the wind gets up a bit as the mass grave is being excavated, and you find that you're being covered in a coat of powder which is made of people. To me, what matters most is the pursuit of happiness and the pursuit of liberty, freedom. So unless you're willing to commit suicide for yourself and for this culture, get used to the compromises you'll have to make and the eventual capitulation that will come to you. But bloody well don't do that in my name. I'm going to fight these people and every other theocrat all the way. Totalitarianism is a cliche. Dictatorship is based on cliched thinking. The only Nazi I know of to be excommunicated by the Roman Catholic Church was Joseph Goebbels. He married a Protestant. Magda Goebbels was a Protestant. The church said, excuse me, we do have our standards. The thing about Trotsky, he combined in himself the role of man of action and man of ideas. And he could write about literature, helped to write the Surrealist Manifesto. The North Korean state was founded in 1950-51. That's the year 1984 was published for the first time. You think, could it be that someone handed a Korean translation of this to Kim Il-sung and said, do you think we could make this fly? And he said, I don't know, but we could sure give it the old college try.
God bless you, Mother Teresa. God bless. God bless.
Everything everybody thinks they know about her is false. It must be the most single successful emotional con job of the 20th century.
Just stop and let's have a meaningful conversation instead of people talking on top of each other.
Don't invite me on and tell me to keep quiet.
Here's the question, okay?
I think it's a very stupid thing to have said.
Well, I think it's a stupid thing.
If I was you, I would not have said something so dumb on TV. I can't believe there is a thinking person here who does not realize that our species would begin to grow to something like its full height if it left this childishness behind. Where they're not credulous, where they don't take things on faith, where they don't make gods or idols or images out of anybody, including fellow human beings, and they learn the pleasures of thinking for themselves. How about that for a modest proposal?
How much longer are you going to do this?
Till I drop.
In one of his more recent books, the articulate and very interesting atheist and critic of Christianity, Christopher Hitchens, God is not great, how religion poisons everything, argues that the whole record of religion, all religion, is toward war and hatred and strife. Whether the Protestant Catholic strife of Belfast in recent decades, or Beirut between historically Christian and historically Muslim heritage, or Belgrade, or Baghdad, or Bombay, all around the world. Religion poisons everything. It has to be said that there's some truth to the charge. It's not for nothing that centuries back, the 30 Years' War was in very large measure in Europe a war of religion. The reason why there's some truth to the charge is because one of the things that religion does, all religion, is transcendentalize issues. That is, it ups the ante by making the issues important. Today, the current round of dominant terrorists are from Islam. And undoubtedly, they would like to see Islamic culture in place and have a bigger share of the financial and cultural pie and influence in the world and so on. But what transcendentalizes their beliefs is their conviction that they represent the mind of God himself. Mind you, it has also been shown by Alistair McGrath in his book on atheism that if you don't have religion to transcendentalize things, you end up transcendentalizing something else. In other words, the transcendentalizing is not merely a function of religion, it's a function of human desire to control. So in the 20th century, for example, the great movements of Nazism and Stalinism were not religiously driven movements. Sometimes in Nazism, the parties claimed a certain kind of background in Christianity. But in point of fact, what drove the two movements, well, on the one hand, it was the transcendentalizing of the state. And on the other, it was the transcendentalizing of race and ethnicity and intrinsic Teutonic superiority. So it's not as if religion poisons everything and everything else is good. The century of the greatest bloodshed, the 20th century, was a century in which it was not religious movements that caused all of this. You don't lose 1/3 of the population of Cambodia because of Christianity, but because of communism. Where one sees that biblical Christianity is bound up with salvation by grace, however, it ought to change everything. Tim Keller in New York writes, "Belief that you are accepted by God by sheer grace is profoundly humbling. The people who are fanatics, then, are not so because they are too committed to the gospel, but because they're not committed enough." If you get just a certain kind of superficial quantity of Bible, gospel, Christian heritage, and become convinced that it's the best and everybody else must have the best too, then it's not going to be too long before you have some new crusades. In the name of Christianity. On the other hand, if you really do drink deeply from what we have been seeing the Bible is about as we work through the entire text, and see that finally our hope is in grace, not because we're stronger or better. We're never more than poor beggars telling other poor beggars where there's bread. It changes everything. Which is why biblical Christianity has always had within its heritage the capacity to challenge and reform. That's why, however ghastly and defenseless the Crusades were, it's the Christian heritage in the West that has apologized for them countless times. After all, Islam took over the Middle East first with equal bloodthirstiness. And there is no trace in the heritage of Islam of any apology for any of it. It's what they expect, because there is not built into the very structure of the heritage a similar understanding that at the end of the day, we stand or fall by grace.
Pastor Wilson, given your previous interactions with Christopher Hitchens, what are your thoughts on his recent announcement that he has cancer?
Yes, after he's just written about that, written a very striking article about that, about how he received the news. Since he received that diagnosis, I've been in some communication with him, and just because of the nature of the case, I think it'd be best if I not go into what we've communicated back and forth. But I have been communicating with him, as I know a number of other Christians have done as well. The thing for Christians to do is obviously to pray, and I know that Christopher's promised that he is going to be writing about all the Christians that have been praying for him and offered to pray for him, and he has said in effect that some of his atheist friends have been kind of mad about it, but Christopher said he's been touched by it, and he certainly appreciates that. I would encourage Christians to pray. I would encourage Christians to pray. First in line would be to pray for healing. Pray for the treatments he's receiving would be effectual, that he would not die. The prognosis is pretty grim for him, that he would not die. But obviously, he's going to die. He's going to die sometime, as we all are. And so the second thing to pray for is that when he goes to meet God, when he goes to meet his Maker, that he will have been converted by that point. He will have reconciled with God by that point. And a third thing I would add is that such a high-profile atheist like Christopher, who's been so outspoken, and who I believe this recent article of him describing how he received the news of his cancer, it's very clear that Christopher is a courageous man. He's meeting this threat to his life with courage and good humor. Right? That's a good. He's a courageous man. But what he would need to do, if God converted his heart, would require far more courage than anything he's done to this point. It would be an act of high courage to climb down from the positions he's taken with regard to God. Because all kinds of people would be hooting and hollering about no atheists in foxholes, and see, a death scare rattled him and that sort of thing. Well, it would take a lot of courage to say, yeah, yeah. So basically, please pray for Christopher Hitchens. Pray that the cancer would go into remission, that the cancer, that he would not die of this cancer at this time. Pray that he would be converted to God, and pray that he would, if the second prayer request is answered, pray that he would handle the whole thing in high courage and good humor, as he's handled this affliction.
Welcome to Reasonable Faith with Dr. William Lane Craig. I'm Kevin Harris in podcast with Dr. Craig, and there are so many people praying for Christopher Hitchens, Bill, that I don't think he has a chance as an atheist. You've had that debate with him, 2 encounters with him. He's one of the 4 horsemen of the so-called New Atheism. He's got esophageal cancer. It's in stage 4. He's anticipating dying and has written some final works on that. But tell us once again, before we discuss some of the things that he's saying as he's approaching death, about your 2 encounters with Christopher.
Well, I didn't have much personal interaction with him, Kevin. It was mainly on the dais itself. But I must say that I've been struck by how many Christians have a genuine affection for this man. Mm-hmm. Despite his vitriolic attacks upon Christianity, he has a sort of lovable, curmudgeonly quality about him that everybody I meet who has seen him loves Christopher Hitchens, and they are genuinely and sincerely praying for either his recovery or for his coming to know Christ as his Savior before his death. People have a genuine, heartfelt concern.
And he said he feels
man.
that too. He says that he sensed it when he was doing this tour that included a debate with you and a dialogue on a panel. He says that he genuinely feels that affection for him, that love for him.
Yeah, and that's gratifying, isn't it? He was well treated at Biola, and I think he sensed that the Christians really liked him.
Now that he's facing the end of his life, he's saying that he wants his fellow atheists to continue what he calls the secular revolution, and has written to some of the organizations, including American Atheist. There does seem to be somewhat of a secular revolution if you look at certain statistics.
Yes, I think that's fair. I think he can rightly say that he has helped with others to spearhead at least an advance in the secularization of Western society, if not a revolution. And I'm doing everything I can with my colleagues who are Christian philosophers and New Testament scholars and scientists to work a revolution of the opposite sort, a renaissance of Christian intellectual engagement and activity, which will overwhelm any sort of secular revolution that Hitchens and others have tried to foment on a popular level.
He says that he's having a long argument with the specter of death in which no one has ever won, he says. But as the idea of death becomes more familiar, he says that he's not pleading for salvation, redemption, and supernatural deliverance. He says because he regards religion and God and so forth as superstition. Now, he equates Christianity, Christian theism, classical theism with superstition.
Right. He at least is sticking to his convictions as he faces death and says that he's not going to have a kind of foxhole conversion. He says, if I should turn to religious belief in the final days of my life, then you'll know that the cancer has finally reached my brain.
Yeah, okay. He's actually warning against that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons that I wanted to bring up the equating of superstition with supernaturalism is that those are 2 different terms. Theism, Christianity, and so on is not superstitious as we define superstition.
Right. I think that some Christians are superstitious. I've known Christians who are paranoid about demons lurking behind every bush, and they'll talk about demons of illness and demons of depression and other sorts of things, and there does seem to be an almost superstitious quality.
So any of us can be superstitious, Christian, non-Christian.
Certainly. I mean, pagan religions, I think, were very superstitious in that.
Mr. Hitchens, that was a curious interruption there. I'm not sure what that was. I address you as an atheist and a secularist and a Marxist. I'm very much troubled by your remarks about the need to stand up and fight this Muslim jihad. I have no time for oppressive religion of any stripe, but I think you are well aware of the long history of crimes committed by the British government in Iraq, the United States government in Vietnam, and today in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm wondering how you can possibly say that it is Western civilization, the civilization of the colonizers and the oppressors, who do it all, of course, in the name of liberation and democracy, how this is not the fundamental problem, rather than what you call the jihad of what I consider to be the response to the crimes of U.S. and European imperialism.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There you have it. You see how far the termites have spread and how long and well they've dined. When someone can get up and say that in a meeting of unbelievers, that the problem is Western civilization, not the Islamic threat to it, that's how far the termites have got. Now, as a matter of fact, sir, I could have asked that question 50 times better than you did and answered it 50 times as comprehensively. If you like, I can, without conceit, refer you to a biography of mine of Henry Kissinger. That is a compendium and anthology of the war crimes committed by the United States and its allies in the Third World and elsewhere, and a call for those people, those responsible, to be arraigned for crimes against humanity and war crimes. It's a cheap paperback published by the New Left Review that anyone can get hold of, and I can't recommend too highly. One of those crimes, I'll just give you an example to show how utterly fatuous your implication is. One of those crimes was the arming and training of the Indonesian armed forces to take over the Republic of East Timor. Some of you are no doubt aware of this terrible atrocity. It's one of Noam Chomsky's best campaigns in writing, leading to the very near physical extirpation of the people of East Timor. A genocide more comprehensive than Cambodia, taking place a little afterwards, with our weapons, with our diplomatic protection, and with the endorsement of Kissinger and Ford. Hands up those who roughly remember this. Okay, not as good as I'd have liked, but still, and sad, but bear it in mind and look it up. Now, what are some of the items of the Al-Qaeda bin Laden manifesto? Well, oddly enough, and this was to my surprise, I thought it would be lower down, Item 3 in the charge against the West is that it reversed course on East Timor, tried to undo the genocide, brought East Timor to a referendum on independence, sent Jose Vieira de Mello, one of the greatest, Sergio Vieira de Mello, one of the greatest UN civil servants, to East Timor to supervise the transition to independence and the election, and made East Timor the newest member of the UN. Bin Laden says, "For this we will never forgive the Christian crusaders and their imperialist friends. They took away a republic from a Muslim land, Indonesia." Most of the people of East Timor, by the way, are Christian and speak Portuguese. A detail. For this, we will never forgive them. For this, that was the reason they gave for blowing up the UN office in Iraq, because that's where Melio was sent next, with a truck bomb of explosives so enormous that it must have been borrowed from the former Iraqi army and Ba'ath Party. That's the reason they gave for blowing up the Australian tourists in Bali, in Indonesia, and the Indonesian taxi drivers who were servicing that resort, because they couldn't forgive the West for its behavior in East Timor. In other words, if you want to avoid upsetting these people, you have to let Indonesia commit genocide in East Timor. Otherwise, they'll be upset with you. You'll have made an enemy. If you tell them they can't throw acid in the faces of unveiled women in Karachi, they will be annoyed with you. If you say, we insist, we think that cartoonists in Copenhagen can print satire on the Prophet Muhammad, you've just made an enemy. You've brought it on. You're encouraging it to happen. So unless you're willing to commit suicide for yourself and for this culture, get used to the compromises you'll have to make and the eventual capitulation that will come to you. But bloody well don't do that in my name, because I'm not doing it. You surrender in your own name, leave me out of it. I'm going to fight these people and every other theocrat all the way. All the way. For free expression, for women's rights, for self-determination of small peoples, for the right of Iraqis to federate and have their own show, for the right of the Lebanese not to be bullied by Hezbollah and to have a multicultural democracy. Yes, I'll fight for this, and I think that the 82nd Airborne is brave to be fighting for it too. And I think you should be ashamed sneering at people who guard you while you sleep. Thanks.
Question for Dr. Cherry.
All right. It won't take a minute to ask. I don't just support and try and help out those who dissent from the ridiculous belief of Christianity, the horrible idea of vicarious redemption. In other words, the idea that by watching another person suffer, an innocent person suffer, that you could be freed not just from your debts or your sins, but your responsibilities. You could cast your sins on a scapegoat. I don't just oppose that disgusting belief. I oppose the Judaism from which it's plagiarized and the Islam that plagiarizes from it. And I give publicity and exposure whenever I can to those who were brave enough in old times to oppose this nightmarish belief. And one of the great opponents of the Islamic totalitarianism in ancient Persia was the great Omar Khayyam, perhaps the greatest poet of old Persia, whose Rubaiyat, I'm sure, is known at least to some of you. And my favorite verse of this comes from the Robert Le Gallienne translation, and it takes the form of a question. The quatrain is in the form of a question. It says, "And do you think that unto such as you, a maggot-minded, starved, fanatic crew, God gave a secret and denied it me? Well, well, what matters it? Believe that too." To this magnificent astronomer and scientist and physician and humanist of Persia, who opposed the cruel, sadistic, verminous, ignorant mullahs of his day, I borrow the question, what is your authority for saying that you know something that I don't?
Christopher, I'm given a probability